Tata, it's a name that is familiar to this entire nation, be it in our kitchens, the salt in our kitchens, or the steel in our buildings. Jamsetji Tata, the founder of this one group that has not just survived but has stood the test of time and thrived as such. And his grandson J.R.D. Tata, in fact, is called this visionary industrialist who has taken the grandfather Jamsetji Tata's ideas and just ran with it. And on 120th birth anniversary of J.R.D. Tata, yet another book on the founder, Jamsetji Tata, was brought out. And today I have with me the co-authors of this book, Jamsetji Tata, Powerful Learnings for Corporate Success, R. Gopalakrishnan and Harish Bhat with me. Thank you so much for joining us here on SoSouth.
Thank you.
So, my first question to you would be, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, from here in your book itself, you have written that, you joined Tata at a much later age than Mr. Bhat over here. How was your experience at a later age as the higher management person, and what was the takeaways that you got from Tata itself?
Well, thank you very much for this show. I can talk about what my experiences was at a later age, and he can talk about how it was at a younger age, though the differences will be fairly self-evident. I had already been vice chairman of Hindustan Lever, I had been around 31 years, and you have become a bit opinionated and cynical. If not cynical, I would say skeptical about corporate speak. So when I came into Tata, I found that it was like driving in another city. Though my license was valid, the rules were very different. And that required me to adapt, because the whole of Tata could not and logically adapt to me. My comment today to you on respect of your question is about how was it different. And I looked at things fairly skeptically. Are they making too much of this founder and founders day, the birthday of J.R.D. Tata, the various events surrounding this? And I was very struck by two things, which I like to just recall. First, I travelled. Ratan Tata encouraged me to get familiar with Tatas by physically going to all sorts of places, to Munnar in Kerala, to Bhivandi or Bhivpuri for the power station. And the presentation of the management always ended with what we are doing for the community. And that struck me. How come in all these far off places you manage to spread this idea that ultimately we are for the community? The second thing that struck me was, at the time I joined Tata, there were probably 300,000 employees. Today it's well over 800,000. They all knew the birthday of the founder, Jamsetji Tata. And they knew the birthday of J.R.D. Tata. I said, how come? People who joined 6 months ago, 1 year ago, 3 years ago, and I had worked 31 years in Unilever, I didn't know the birthday of William Hesketh Lever. So these two things caused me to start thinking about what is different about Tata culture. I doubt if I would have had that curiosity if I joined at 25, because I didn't know any better. But Harish can talk better to that, since he's the guy who joined at 25.
So, which means you have had probably a longer span of within Tata itself than
yes,
Mr.
Indeed. About 10-12 years more. He joined in 87, I joined in
I joined at the age of 25. I'm 62 now, so that's 37 years.
You're still part of Tata?
I'm still a director on the boards of Tata Group companies.
So, how has it been? I mean, like, why stick to today in an age when people are fast moving, there is no loyalty to any particular company, any particular taste in itself. Everybody is looking for the next better thing to improve themselves. You were sticking to so you have stuck to a place for nearly 4 decades.
Yeah, so very interesting question, Preeja, and many people ask me this. How come you have stuck to Tatas for close to 4 decades? This is the only organization you have worked for.
In fact, he answered that question in the book.
And there's a very interesting story in the book where I write about it. But let me summarize it for you. There are 3 or 4 reasons why I have stayed with the Tatas for my entire career, and there are tens of thousands of people like me who have stayed with Tatas for their entire career. First, I think I've got very interesting work to do. I started my career selling and marketing tea. We were a very small plantation company at that time, competing with Hindustan Unilever, which was Mr. Gopalakrishnan's company at that time. And we were trying to find our feet in branded tea. And that was a very, very exciting experience. We did well. We grew from a 0% share of the market and came very close to Hindustan Unilever's market share. Today, Tata Tea is a well-admired brand across the country. So, I started with marketing tea. Many years later, the group moved me 12 or 13 years later to marketing jewelry. And then I was part of the jewelry business for a few years. For a brief while, I was part of the telecom business. And then for a very long stint, I was part of the watches business, Titan and Fast Track and Sonata. So over that, and then finally, my last assignment in the group was as brand custodian at Tata Sons, managing the Tata brand. So this was very, very interesting across categories, you know, tea and coffee and jewelry and watches, and finally the mother Tata brand. It helped me build brands. It helped me nurture brands. Some of them I created, some of them I nurtured, which were already strong brands. So very, very interesting work across the 37 years that I spent. The second thing that I must say is that not once in these 37 years, Preeja, has the group ever asked me to do anything which is against my conscience. And I think that helps me sleep well at night. And you'll agree with me that a good night's sleep is worth its weight in gold.
Definitely.
The third, when you work for Tatas, I go back to the point that Mr. Gopalakrishnan made. And that point is made powerfully in this book that we have co-authored. 66% of our parent company, Tata Sons, is owned by the Tata Charitable Trust, which means 66% of the dividends that Tata Sons gives out of the profits that it earns, goes to the Tata Charitable Trust. So whether I was working in Tata Tea, whether I was working in Titan, or whether one of my colleagues is in Tata Power or Tata Steel, you know that a good part of the profits that you produce eventually go to the Tata Trust and through them back to the community and society. And I think that gives you a larger purpose to what you're doing. It's not that you're just a marketer creating very profitable brands for the group, which in itself is very fulfilling, but it's also that the work that you're doing is eventually contributing back to the community and the nation, which is a very, very fulfilling feeling to have. And in addition to these 3 factors, the group has also encouraged me with my passions. I wanted to write books. 12 or 13 years back, I went up to Mr. Gopalakrishnan saying I would like to write my first book. And I was given a sabbatical by Titan, the company that I was part of at that time, to write that book. So, you know, and the Tatas care for people. And that care, I think, is very reassuring. So when you're part of a family which cares for you, why would you want to leave?
In fact, both of you have been talking about community itself, and I think the Tata one of the reasons maybe why Tata has thrived over 150 years is because of this idea of giving back to the community. How exactly have you guys grown as people, not as personal, in your personal lives and in your professional lives, by having joined this one company which actually looks to giving back to the community rather than just keeping the profits within the family? Because it is a family run business at the end of the day.
No, I would question that, Preeja. I don't consider Tata's to be a family run business. In fact, you in your opening remarks referred to J.R.D. Tata as the grandson of Jamsetji Tata. He's not. They're not related in any direct way. And neither is Ratan Tata, the last chairman, the grandson of J.R.D. Tata. They happen to have the name Tata. There is possibly a family connection through second cousin, first cousin, but let's not go into that now. It's not a family run business. If you walk in, you will not find in the boardroom people bearing the name Tata, or even if it's a different name being considered as a daughter or son-in-law, you'll find the odd one, if at all you do. So it's a highly professional company, no different from Hindustan Lever. And this is a misnomer people have. It's quite different in that sense from many genuinely family-run businesses where the son or the daughter or more than one son or one daughter is lurking around. The second thing is, people stay in a company and grow in a company, you have to stay to grow. So I use that sequence. If they can find meaning in the work they do in the company, if it's a rote, get in there at 9 o'clock, do telephone calls, do whatever till 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, or till late in the night. That may be part of that's what I call the carbohydrate of your work. But the work must have a protein also. And that protein is what I call meaning. The meaning that I have found, I suspect I speak for Harish also, but let him speak for himself, is I said, hey, it's been a long day, it's been a tough day, sometimes a frustrating day. But if it made another rupee, it's nice to know that a large part of it is going back to the community. And I had contemporaries who were leaving their careers and going into doing NGO work. I said, I'm getting paid, I'm doing a job, and the NGO work is also happening. It gave me a sense of serving other people before serving myself. That's my take. I don't know, Harish.
No, Preeja, I completely agree with Mr. Gopalakrishnan. You know, I mentioned to you in my earlier answer also, I have been part of very, very successful brands like Tata Tea, Tanishq, Titan, Fast Track, the Tata brand itself. I have spent a lot of my time nurturing these brands and I have grown as a marketer. But I have found it really fulfilling that eventually the profits that these brands make, some part of those profits go back directly to the community through the Tata Trust, because we are majority owned by the Tata Trust, and that certainly brings a larger than life meaning into your role. And I think having a larger purpose to your role is very, very important, because sometimes otherwise you have a livelihood and you have a purpose which don't match each other. But here the livelihood and purpose come together in the Tata Group, which has been quite magical by itself.
In fact, if I may add a little anecdote, Harish, I don't know if Harish knows about this. I know this because my colleagues have told me. When they introduced this 2% compulsory CSR for companies to provide for, very senior Tata people were at the meeting with the ministry had called to sell the idea that corporate should agree and we'll amend the Companies Act. And the people who are representing Tata said, do you want us to cut down our CSR? Because we're already more than 2%. And that really surprised people. You're already more than 2%? We said, yeah, but we would, if you don't mind, we won't cut it down. Don't worry about your 2%. That kind of story energizes you. And then we actually sat and calculated what we are spending, and it was 3-4%. With some definitional change, it could be 4. With some other definitional change, it could be 3. But certainly, it was not less than 2. And that gives you a feeling that there's something good happening here. Let me be a part of it.
So, is that what you said, that it is not really profit oriented per se in the books, because you have mentioned about businesses as they are becoming profit oriented. Tata itself has not looked at being just profit oriented itself.
So let me nuance that. Okay, we are a very profitable company,
and we are profit oriented. Also,
when I was the CEO of a business, or when I was the chief operating officer of a business, there were very, very strong profit and return metrics which I had to carry with me, and I had to report to the board whether I would achieve those metrics, not achieve those metrics. Not just to the board, I was answerable to shareholders of the company. So to that extent, and perhaps very fiercely so, the Tata Group is as competitive and as oriented towards being profitable and earning all the economic metrics as any other company in the world, and I would think immensely successful as well. That is why we have established market leadership in so many segments and profitable market leadership. But the earning of profits, I would believe, is not the purpose of the group. The purpose of the group is for those profits then to be used for some purpose to the community. Whether it could be the building of hospitals, that fight cancer, it could be the fight against COVID-19, it could be art and culture, it could be various purposes. But so the purpose of the group is not the making of profits. The purpose of the group is that the community is center stage, and you can use this economic engine to be of some use to the community. Like J.R.D. Tata famously said, what comes from the people goes back to the people many times over. That reflects the purpose.
I think that's probably what you meant in the opening, just before the chapter 4 opens, where it says, and I'm reading it out, what is in the book: no success or achievement in material terms is worthwhile unless it serves the needs or interests of the country and its people and is achieved by fair and honest means. Good human relations not only bring great personal rewards but are essential to the success of any enterprise. This is a portion of J.R.D. Tata's letter to K.C. Bhansali, who was a school teacher, on 13th of September 1965. And after that, your chapter or the portion about the section about people of Tata, it's as in who have come and gone in Tata begins. So I'm hoping that this is where you mean by people stay with Tata because they find meaning in not just what they do, but in giving back to the community in their own little way by still having a 9-to-5 job, so to speak.
It gives you a sense of purpose and meaning in career. Now, I'm not saying that attracts everybody. Like any other organization, we also lose people. There is attrition. There will be people, you'll find lots of people who say, I used to be with Tata. So it's not that that binds. All we can point to is a glue that is strong enough to prevent the centrifugal force from everybody leaving. Right?
And I think, Preeja, purpose is a very, very powerful force because in your career, what are you looking for? You're looking for success, you're looking for growth, you're looking for dignity, you're looking for meaningful work that you can do. But apart from all this, when you work for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in your career, you also want to have made some contribution back to the world in which you're living. And you can do that in many ways. But by working with the Tata Group, one way you do it is that the work you do and the profits you produce, some part of it, because of the hard wiring of the group, because we are majority owned by the Tata Charitable Trust, goes back to the community.
Can I add a comment about this family managed business?
Please do.
When you have the Hurun's list of the world's wealthiest people, have you ever found the name Tata in it?
Not in the top 5 that I read just yesterday.
You won't find it in the top 50 also. That's what I mean when I say it's not a family managed business. I'm not saying that Tata family members who are alive are poor people. That's not my point. My point is they are not trying to get rich. Somehow they've invested, their ancestors have invested the money back into instruments or machinery which can take the profits of the companies and use it for the community. They personally are well-off people. I'm not complaining. He's not complaining. We've retired and we are given a decent pension. But that doesn't enable us to go to the Bahamas on a yacht trip every 6 months. Neither do we need it. So I think it's not a family managed business in the sense that we read about other family managed businesses. And I think it's a great source of satisfaction. I can say this, I've asked this to Ratan Tata. And he said, I would have been horribly ashamed if my name appeared in that list, personally.
So, you talk a lot about Mr. Tata, and you earlier mentioned you were mentored by him also. But then, Ratan Tata is as much of a visionary as J.R.D. Tata itself has been. And, there has never been any sort of controversy attached to their names because they are these big names, they are these stalwarts of how businesses should be run. Yet today, the businesses that are run today, rat race is actually probably a milder term when I think of how businesses are run. Anything and everything is about profits, and yet what Mr. Bhat said about Tata is a profitable company, yet running after profit is not it. How many of the people in your generation, when you guys were at the helm of Tata or on whatever brands and sections you guys were running, had been that kind of thing? Because you also talk about loyalty, loyal people who are there. How does that translate into today's world as well?
Frankly, I don't think loyalty is dead. Your question has a presumption that increasingly loyalty is dead. Even if you look at attrition rates, which is a crude index of loyalty or people staying on, in every sector where our companies operate, the attrition rate of our company there is less than that of competitors. How do you explain it? You take software. I have seen the attrition rates of software companies for the last 20 years when it's reported. TCS has always been a few points less than the second, the next one. So, it does reflect the reality that human beings are mercenary. They do think of quick money, all that is true. But while there's greed and badness, there is also goodness and generosity. Otherwise, society wouldn't be one. Tata is a society. Every Indian, 1.4 billion people are not chasing money and being cutthroat. But of the 1.4 billion, you may think of 20 names which come to your mind and another 2,000 which don't come to your mind. But one swallow doesn't make a summer. I'm not saying everybody in Tata is a lofty person, is a priest and is given up the world. That's certainly not true. We are all, as Harish said, as profit orientated, as committed to delivering. But we know we are there not because we want to accumulate more money, but we have to provide the money for its usage. That's important. If a family, a husband was earning more and more money, but it didn't come to the family, you wouldn't think of him as a good husband, would you?
Good provider, probably.
Yeah, but it's not going to the family.
Correct.
We see the family is our community. And the more money we earn, the more money goes to the housewife or the lady who's running the house. And that's fine. That's a good thing. If I make
and you know,
money.
Preeja, the very first story that we narrate here in the book, okay, and if you permit me, I'll take a couple of minutes to narrate that. You know, the first greenfield enterprise that Jamsetji Tata started, our founder started in 1874, was a textile mill, Empress Mills in Nagpur. It was one of the most profitable enterprises of his time. So he was also very profit oriented. And in the book I have discussed how much return it gave shareholders. Yesterday I was quoting it at a function where this book was launched. So it was one of the most profitable enterprises of its time. But what he did in the Empress Mills was very different from what many other owners of mills did in those days. In the 1880s, he introduced a gratuitous pension fund in the Empress Mills. By the 1890s, they had an accident insurance program for the workers of Empress Mills. By 1901, Jamsetji Tata had introduced in the Empress Mills the concept of a provident fund, which all of us see on our salary slips today, probably for the first time in the country. More than 100 years ago, there was a creche at Empress Mills for the children of working women of Empress Mills. More than 100 years ago, Empress Mills and the directors of Empress Mills had sponsored a girls' school, the JRD Tata Girls' School at Nagpur. And many people came to Jamsetji Tata and asked him, you know, this is money that belongs to your shareholders. Why is this money being spent on worker welfare? And in 1895, Jamsetji Tata answered that through a speech that he was giving. And he said, we are not more philanthropic or more generous than anyone else. We don't consider ourselves to be. But we think that we started this business on sound and straightforward business principles. We know this wealth belongs to our shareholders. But we also think the welfare of our workers, the health and welfare of our workers, is the surest foundation for a prosperous tomorrow. And that health and welfare of the workers in the community, in his mind, expanded to mean the nation. And everything that he did thereafter, whether it was the Tata Steel, India's first integrated steel plant, Tata Power, which was a very major hydroelectric project, the Indian Institute of Science, where we are sitting now within the campus of the Indian Institute of Science, all these ventures, the one thing he kept in mind was, would it be good for the nation? And that is where this purpose started from. And Mr. Gopalakrishnan has rightly referred to it in this book as the origin of the river Tata, so to speak. I'm going to request him to talk about that a little bit, Preeja, because I think it's a very interesting analogy.
I actually also wanted to ask you the same thing. You mentioned Tata as a river, the group itself as a river. How? How does the concept of river set with a business establishment?
You know, in every civilization, including ours, a river is the lifeblood of a community. It has a simple origin somewhere in some mountain, then it flows into a huge plain. It nourishes cultures, civilizations, languages, and finally breaks into little rivulets in a delta. So you think of the Ganga, you think of the Kaveri. It provides livelihoods for people. It provides a way of life for people. And rivers are worshipped everywhere, whether it's the Euphrates or the Nile or the Ganga or the Kaveri. Tata is like that. Many people's business comes up, is like a shooting star, and then after 30, 40, 50 years, it may or may not be there in that form. There are many others. It's not that Tata is the only one, but since our subject is Tata, let me keep to Tata. It's one of the world's longest rivers, 156 years. It has been the longest river, the river that has created prosperity for the largest number of people under the same management system for longer than any other business in the world. I'm using some extreme words, like I'm not done a statistical calculation. Let's say it's amongst the longest or amongst the largest. It continues to have a vibrant philosophy. He referred to Jamsetji Tata and Empress Mills. I could say 100 years after him, or not 100 years, maybe about 80 years, 60 years after him, Sumant Mulgaonkar did the same thing in Tata Motors, Telco as it was called, and that's described in the book, where he got 1700 acres to put up a motor factory in a truck factory in Pune, and as is described in the book, he spent a lot of the time and money initially putting up a nature conservatory, a garden, where birds would come. Huh? And a lake, which if you go today also, you'll find stalks and, and his concept was, long before the word ESG was coined, that I must make sure that we're going to use up a lot of resources, that we put these resources back into the ground. And there are many stories, I could go on. The important thing is not that Jamsetji had a philosophy. This is not a biography of Jamsetji.
Yeah, that's what you guys have again and again mentioned.
Again and again we mentioned that to keep a philosophy alive, even in a family, doesn't happen.
So what is this philosophy that, he talked about the welfare of the people. In fact, he talked about, Tata as a company itself, your supervisors, your superiors, allowing you to take that time away from your, regular job to look into this one thing that you had a heart in, writing. And you have actually written a lot of books as well since then. How is that philosophy applicable to all the employees of not just Tata, and how can, that is part of my question. Second is, how can other companies try to implement this similar philosophy or same philosophy to, invigorate loyalty amongst them, because we all come back to businesses that need to sustain over time.
I think the core philosophy of the Tata Group, okay, there is a statement that we use often within the Tata Group, but the core philosophy of the Tata Group is to put the community center stage, and everything revolves around the community, what you can do for the community. Okay. Employee care is one element of that, because employees are one part of the community. We are not the only part of the community. There is there is the city around us, there is the state around us, the nation around us, but employee care is one part of that philosophy. And the Tata Group does a lot on employee care. There is a lot of, there's a lot of work that happens on what employees do as part of volunteering programs. There's a lot of work which goes into care for specific segments of employees. And maybe I may not have all that detail with me, but I do think of the Tatas as one of the most caring employers. So employees is definitely one large segment of the community, and the Tata Group is very, very focused on it.
In fact, there are these P's that you guys have mentioned in the introduction itself. One of them, which is the philosophy, and that is a beginning of the powerful learnings of corporate success that you said. And today everybody is looking for that success. how would you describe rather than describe, how do you think people can, because at the end of the day, this book is supposedly about the learnings of it. How do you think these philosophies, these P's that has been listed in the book, can be translated and emulated by other companies to have a little bit more of a shelf life, so to speak?
You know, this is a, without appearing preachy to other people, we are very sensitive that we can't go around telling other people, do it like us, you know, that's, so I want to give that qualifier in answering your question. I have deliberately taken the metaphor of the river. If rivers were human beings and they had a conference that I don't want to be a dried up river after 200 miles, how did you, Mr. Indus or Mr. Ganga or Mr. Kaveri, they have a 1,000, 2,000 kilometer run. How come you got a long? Then what would the river say, the long river? He's saying, I started with a little trickle somewhere near Talakaveri, and that simplicity manifested itself into benefiting lots of people on the way and creating stories and icons. So if you go to the Kaveri, somebody will say, Tipu Sultan crossed here, Srirangapatna, this happened, and Ganga has its own stories. Until I finally got discharged, giving a lot of prosperity to farmers who were raising rice in the Tanjavur Delta. That's what he would say. What enabled you to do this, Mr. Kaveri or Mr. Ganga? Well, you know, I had to choose the hydrology which will allow me to flow. Because if I allowed myself to go into a direction where I had to go uphill, I would dry up. You said, what would you tell other companies? I'd say, have a simple philosophy. Work on the hydrology of how that philosophy is transmitted within your company. I talked about the birthday of the founder. It's not a simple function. It happens around the world. 5,000 people watch some of these functions. You know, it's like a family having a puja. Now, initially, you'll be a bit skeptical, say, what is all this mambo jumbo? But gradually, you realize that it's an occasion to transmit the values of the family. That's what I call hydrology.
I'm going to take your metaphor and run with it in a manner that, well, Wayanad, the disaster that happened a month ago, as stories come in, the entire thing, I mean, like the geologists and the experts, they all talk about that, you know, it happened in this Chaliyar river system. And the landmass which became the landslide and created that kind of tragedy was also this one trickle itself. Now, my metaphor here would be that one little trickle destroyed everything in its wake. When, on one hand, how does one differentiate or create a system or a hydrology where a destruction of such level does not happen in any community as such?
That's exactly the definition of hydrology. The gradients and the angles through which the liquid flows have to be chosen. There are conscious choices you make. Now, in the case of nature, you can't say nature works on nature's principles. But Tata also gets into businesses, gets into trouble once in a while with some of the businesses, and those are described in the book. And then, what does it do? The question is not whether you got into trouble. The question is, what did you do after you got into trouble? That is a lesson. The human instinct is suppress it, don't let the world know. Why disclose? Tata works the other way around. That's what I mean by hydrology. So, I think it is a corporate choice that you can make. What is your philosophy? I worked in another company called Unilever. The simplicity of his philosophy was, for a long time, hygiene was not a common thing in the 1860s, 1870s, you know, washing your hand with soap. In fact, Ignal Semmelweis, when he proposed that there are germs on your hand, he was sent to the asylum because people said, what do you mean there are invisible insects on my hand? So, William Hesketh Lever, who founded Unilever, was a product of that intellectual ferment. And he said, I want to keep making soap till the teeming millions all over the world are hygienic and clean. Even today, if you see what Hindustan Lever does, or Unilever, They're making you clean, they're making you hygienic, they're making you look nice, they're making you feel nice. It's in the same area of hygiene. And it's interesting to know as an aside that now it's been established by the World Health Organization that the soap industry has saved more lives on this planet than the entire pharmaceutical industry. Do you know that?
I did not know that.
But you can check it out. The soap industry, the hygiene industry has created more. So having toilets in the bathroom, Swachh Bharat and all that is far more vibrant as an idea, though it looks very commonplace. Now, I'm not saying high-level drug research is bad, don't get me wrong. But I call this hydrology. You had a simple philosophy and then you spread it around throughout and make sure that succeeding generations learn it. That is done in your family or my family or his family with your grandfather telling you stories. How did you learn all the stories? How did you transmit it to your children? That's called hydrology. That's what I mean by hydrology. Companies tend to ignore the hydrology. You find your own hydrology. There is no universal hydrology, but please practice the hydrology. That's the metaphor.
You know, and I'd like to extend that metaphor a little bit. One of the readers, he's an entrepreneur, and I saw his comment on this book. He said, listen, the 7 P's which have been painted out in this book, whether it's purpose, persistence, profits with responsibility, he said, they flow very well. He said, what I have told my sons to do is that let's take one chapter of this book every week, read it, read the essay, read the stories which go along with it, and then let's sit down and see what does that really mean for our own business. You know, how can we adapt that principle for our own business? So if you look at the entire river and look at various elements of the hydrology of the river, I am not a hydrologist, so I don't know, but Mr. Gopalakrishnan referred to gradient, to flow, various elements. I think they could pick out each element from this book and then see how best it can be adapted or even created for their respective businesses, because it's not that what has worked for Tata will work for everyone. Each one has to find their own solution, but the hydrology is important, and if the river has to flow for many, many years and many, many kilometers, then I think there are some answers that this book provides.
You know, I should add here, for what it's worth, for the listener may be interested, viewer may be interested. Before we arrived at this metaphor of the river, I had done a research project with some academics. I said, I don't want to take companies, I want to take companies which were startups during my career, in the last 50, 60 years. When I began my career, they didn't exist. Companies like Kotak Mahindra Bank, companies like Biocon, companies like TCS, companies like Infosys, they didn't exist when I began my career. They are about 50 years old, middle-aged, if I may use that word. Are they showing signs of becoming long surviving institutions?
Are they?
So we made a set of criteria and we said we'll interview the CEOs and the management, and we selected 5 or 6 companies which showed signs. And we said, what are the symptoms? It's like a pathologist looking at your blood report and saying, yeah, everything is fine. And we found certain things which are all described in the books that we have written on that. I don't want to digress from our conversation. People power is one of them. Critical thinking was one of them. Managing short and long term simultaneously is one of them. And so on and so forth. That gave me the idea that how will a person who's reading this saying, what can I learn from it? How will he digest it unless you have a metaphor? Because if you say, this is the table, this is like giving you a weight chart, a height chart, a blood pressure chart, and each morning you keep referring to it. It's not going to work that way. So we created this metaphor. It is inspired by the work done on some other project which is related to this work.
So here my second question, or rather one of the last questions, would be to ask you, how do you give people that power? Because at the end of the day, any establishment is all about the people that it is functioning with, because the critical thinking also comes with people. The prowess or their understanding of anything, their ambition also works into any, and it is not just about a company. any particular, you said family, you said river, you said all these things are built on the human thinking itself. How can this be translated into any sector? Let's not just say it's about business, any other sector, any other thing, if it has to thrive, it has to survive. How does it go about it?
See, I just want to give a simple answer from one of the stories that we have narrated in this book. And it's not a story of today, it's a story of Jamsetji Tata's time. We have heard of Jamsetji Tata, but did you know that Jamsetji Tata had very competent people supporting him? People like Bizonji Mehta, people like Burjorji Padshah, people like Charles Page Perrin, people like R.D. Tata, his own son Dorabji Tata. You know, two things come out of that story to me. One, that he selected people for their capability. He selected a person like Bizonji Mehta for his administrative capability, for his capability of running a textile mill. He selected Burjorji Padshah, who was an intellectual, to help him set up the Indian Institute of Science. Burjorji Padshah had won prizes from physics to economics to history in his education. But when he wanted technology for Tata Steel and he did not find it in India, he went to New York and requested Charles Page Perrin, one of the best engineers of New York, to come to India to help him set up. So one was very clearly selecting capable people. And the second was, once he selected them, he empowered them. So I think there is something magical in the combination of capability and empowerment. And this is seen every generation of the Tata Group. Capable people who have been empowered to take forward their respective businesses or their respective functions. I think there is something in that combination which is applicable across industries, across sectors. So, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, over to you.
No, I would agree with that. The only twist I would add to what you say, as a 52-year-old who came, not the 25-year-old, is I found Tata's recruitment, they were not conscious of it. There are many things I stumbled upon and somebody would say, is that true? I didn't realize it. And then I'd tell them why I thought so. And they would say, now that you say so. For example, at one stage I went to Mr. Ratan Tata and I said, of the top 40 guys you got in our team, 20 guys are from non-Tata. They all joined at the age of 40 plus. They are not the ones who joined at 25. He said, that can't be true. I said, here's the list. Tata is very tolerant in his culture. In many other companies, it ejects a person. So they recruit people for attitude, also for skills, but more for attitude. Now, recruiting for attitude and not only on skills is not common. Most people get very carried away with the skill that he is very good in this or that.
Can you expound on, when you say attitude, what exactly is that attitude any person, especially in the later lives? Because if you really look about it, in today's world, almost everybody is kind of at a burnout stage towards their late 30s, early 40s, and that is a time when they're almost halfway through their careers. And this is when they also...
No, but what's your question? Your question is, what do you mean by attitude?
What do I mean by attitude? How people can actually build that?
So, the attitude is that I'm going to adapt to what's happening here rather than the other way around. Burnout and so on are personal issues. I don't want to get into that. At least that's not my reading of your question. I'll give you an example. I joined at 52. Of course, I came with a completely different set of attitudes than young Harish Bhat at 25. That's to be expected. When I found, it is not that I was unethical but my perception of the right way to do things, quote unquote. And then I said, I must change. Now, and we have had people, I don't want to mention names, who said, no, I am now a senior person, others must adapt to me. That's one facet of attitude. The second facet of attitude, what is all this going on all the time about society and community? Come on, damn it, let's get the profits up and give it to the shareholder, which is very common everywhere. But over a period of time, if you cannot adjust to this and you're wanting to make Tata into a mercenary company, then it becomes rather difficult for you to survive. So when I use the word attitude, I'm reading this book on anthropology. You must be culturally fluid. And if you recruit people at a senior level, one of the dangers is you're not culturally fluid. But the ones who survive are the people who are culturally fluid.
I would add, when you talked about attitude, okay, it's not just at the lateral recruitment stage when people come in at senior levels. But even when I sit on the interview panels of entry-level recruitment, attitude is a very, very important factor that we take into account. And I would think attitude would also mean, does the person have a growth mindset? Is he or she open to new ideas? Is he or she adaptable, like Mr. Gopalakrishnan said? Does he or she have a positive mindset and a problem-solving mindset? These are all factors which I would range within the overall umbrella of.
And Harish, in all fairness, it must be said, this gives the impression we recruit some angels from heaven. That's not true.
That's
That's not true. In trying to say briefly, you're trying to say this is what you look for. We get lots of people who don't quite fit that. Some of them adjust and they make a good career, and some of them don't and they move along.
So one of the things that we have done in this book, okay, each of, this book has essays in it and then it has stories in it. And each of these stories revolve around people. Some of them are around Jamsetji Tata or J.R.D. Tata or Ratan Tata. Some of them are around people like Sumant Mulgaonkar, Xerxes Desai, Darbari Seth, and many other managers of the group. But I think each of these stories, apart from the crux of the story itself, would also bring out the attitude with which that person took, the attitude of that person and how it helped them to realize whatever they were doing in that story.
So when you say attitude, and I'm guessing this is applicable to any workplace where there is a team of people, where they are looking towards the, empowerment of that product, that business itself. The entire team must be adaptable to not just each other, but the changing times as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And how did it, okay, explain it to me how, like, let's say you joined at 52. He was already there at 25. You guys started working together. It's like age itself, experience itself, there's 3 decades of difference over there. How do you overcome the extra 20, 25 plus years of experience? And how did you overcome that lack of the same in Harish? And I'm just taking your example so that,
Yeah, we didn't work directly with each other, but I understand your question. Listen, the heart of adaptability is the ability to learn how to listen rather than speak. In our management training, we are taught how to speak. He's a product of an IIM, I'm not. And in IIM, you get marks for CP, they call it, class participation. The one who shoots his mouth off first gets extra points. That's fine. That gets you up to a point in a career. It's not a virtue unless it's overdone. It's not a vice unless it's overdone. But one of the things you learn by the time you are 35, 40, it is more important to listen than to speak. And that is the kind of skill that if you're a 52-year-old recruit has to learn. If I come in with the attitude, oh, I've been 31 years, I'm vice chairman of XYZ company, I know how it's all done. This is the way we used to do it, you also do it the same way. You know how it's going to end. Conversely, if the guy who's 25 says, we've always done it this way, what is this funny ideas you come with from somewhere else? It's also not going to end well.
So how does somebody find that middle ground?
By talking.
But you just said that.
No, by listening and talking. Listening is a step one. Listen, step two. Even in the larger political context, you can see one of the problems the world faces is nobody wants to listen, everybody wants to talk.
I think open conversations are so powerful. Open listening and open conversations are the best way to getting to middle ground and something which is Pareto optimal for everybody.
Then how does somebody get over this entire hierarchical notions? Because at the end of the day, any structure will have a hierarchy. There is one tier, and there are people under that one umbrella. Then there are more people under it, and then there are more people under it. So the conversation between the top tier and the last tier is.
And that's the reason why we felt, as a group, that we need a system to deal with it. It can't be left to Gopal's way of doing, Harish's way of doing, Preeja's way of doing. And we adopted a system which we christened the Tata Business Excellence Model, which measures how people do various things. One of them is what you just said. How do you relate with people? And actually measures you. So it's like doing an annual medical test. You get your blood test done, your urine test, your stool test, your heart, your this, and you get a bunch of reports. That happens, you won't believe it. 800 people have been trained to do this in Tatas. They go to every company, they do it, and they give them a annual medical report. I'm using a metaphorical term, and says you got to improve in ABC area. Now, if you choose not to improve, that's up to you. I can tell you you're overweight, lose 10 kilos, but if you choose not to do it, then bad things start to happen. But then it's now become a part of the, when I joined, it wasn't there. Not that I started it, don't get me wrong. But when I joined, it wasn't there. And now people say, it's like if there's a NEET exam or a, what do you call it, CMAT, GMAT, then you prepare accordingly. So we must have a system, and it's the system that is working. Systems are run by people, so people have to work. This ability to bring together systems, people and ideas. That's what conversation does, what Harish referred to. Bring together systems, people and ideas.
So, I think even though I would love to have a longer conversation.
You can carry on. You can carry on.
I would love to have a longer conversation with you, but I think you are also time bound, time challenged. We probably can get together again, maybe over a Zoom call or something like that. Technology has advanced so much. So with that, thank you so much, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, and thank you so much, Mr. Harish Bhat, for having joined us here on India Today SoSouth, giving life lessons, more or less, if somebody wants to read between the lines of where these are the life lessons. And with that, I, Preeja Aravind, signs off for India Today SoSouth. Until we meet next.